Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we're going to take a fascinating journey into the heart of Central Asia to explore the rich culture and complex history of a little-known ethnic group called the Yaghnobi people. Now, you might be wondering, who are the Yaghnobis and why should we care about them? Well, buckle up, because their story offers an incredible window into some of the most important themes in cultural studies and the humanities today. The Yaghnobis are a small ethnic minority living in remote mountain valleys of Tajikistan. But don't let their tiny numbers fool you. This group punches way above its weight when it comes to cultural and historical significance. You see, the Yaghnobis are believed to be the last living descendants of the ancient Sogdians, who were once the most influential merchants and cultural brokers along the Silk Road trading routes that connected China to the Mediterranean for over 1,000 years. So in many ways, the story of the Yaghnobis is the story of Central Asia itself, a tale of cultural crossroads, of empires rising and falling, of traditions preserved against incredible odds, and of people striving to maintain their identity in the face of massive forces of change. By delving into their history and culture, we'll explore fascinating questions about language and identity, about the preservation of minority cultures in an age of globalization, about the lingering impacts of Soviet social engineering policies, and about the complex interplay between tradition and modernity. But this isn't just an academic exercise. The Yaghnobi story also raises profound questions that are relevant to all of us, regardless of our background. How do we define who we are in a rapidly changing world? What parts of our cultural heritage are worth preserving, and at what cost? How do small communities maintain their unique identities while also participating in the broader currents of society? These are issues that many of us grapple with in our own lives and communities. Over the next hour or so, we'll dive deep into several key aspects of Yaghnobi culture and history. We'll explore their ancient origins and how they've managed to preserve their unique language and traditions over centuries of turbulent history. We'll look at how Soviet-era forced resettlement policies upended their traditional way of life, and how they're working to revitalize their culture today. We'll examine how their experience reflects broader themes of cultural loss and revitalization playing out around the world. And we'll consider what lessons their story might hold for other minority cultures facing similar challenges. My goal is to make this journey as engaging and accessible as possible, whether you're a seasoned anthropologist or just someone curious to learn about a fascinating culture you've never encountered before. I'll be peppering our discussion with plenty of vivid anecdotes, surprising facts, and connections to contemporary issues that I think will really bring this material to life. By the end of our exploration, I hope you'll come away with a deeper appreciation for the incredible diversity of human cultures, a better understanding of some of the key forces shaping identity and tradition in our globalized world, and perhaps even some new perspectives on your own cultural heritage and identity. So if you're ready to embark on a journey to one of the most remote and intriguing corners of Central Asia, let's dive in and discover the remarkable world of the Yaghnobi people. Part 1. The Last Heirs of Sogdiana, Yaghnobi Origins and Cultural Preservation. Let's begin our exploration by delving into the ancient roots of Yaghnobi culture and the remarkable story of how this tiny group has managed to preserve their unique identity over millennia. The story of the Yaghnobis begins over 2,500 years ago in the flourishing oasis cities of ancient Sogdiana. This was a land of legendary wealth and cultural sophistication, strategically positioned at the crossroads of the Great Silk Road trade routes. The Sogdians were renowned as the preeminent merchants of their day, with trading networks stretching from China to Persia and beyond. They were also brilliant diplomats and cultural mediators, known for their linguistic skills and their ability to bridge different civilizations. At its height, Sogdian culture and language dominated much of Central Asia. The Great Silk Road cities of Samarkand and Bukhara were Sogdian foundations. Sogdian merchants established thriving expatriate communities as far away as China, where they played a crucial role in facilitating trade and cultural exchange. They were also instrumental in spreading religions like Buddhism, Manichaeism, and Nestorian Christianity across Asia. But this golden age couldn't last forever. In the 8th century, Arab Muslim armies swept across Central Asia. Many Sogdians converted to Islam, while others fled to the mountains to preserve their traditional Zoroastrian faith and way of life. It's believed that the ancestors of today's Yaghnobis were among those who sought refuge in the remote Yaghnob Valley, high in the Fan Mountains of what is now Tajikistan. This is where the story takes a remarkable turn. While Sogdian civilization faded into history elsewhere, in this isolated mountain fastness, a small group managed to preserve their ancient language and many elements of their traditional culture right up to the present day. It's as if a little piece of the ancient world was frozen in time, protected by the rugged mountain terrain. The Yaghnob Valley is an incredibly harsh environment, with brutally cold winters that cut it off from the outside world for months at a time. But it was precisely this isolation that allowed the Yaghnobis to maintain their unique identity for over 1,000 years. Generation after generation, they passed down their language, their customs, and their memories of their glorious Sogdian heritage. Now, you might be wondering, how do we know the Yaghnobis are really descended from the ancient Sogdians? Well, the linguistic evidence is quite compelling. The Yaghnobi language is classified as the only surviving descendant of Sogdian. When scholars first encountered it in the late 19th century, they were astonished to find that it preserved many archaic features of ancient Sogdian that had long since disappeared from other Iranian languages. This linguistic preservation is nothing short of miraculous when you consider the forces arrayed against it. Over the centuries, the Yaghnobis were surrounded by speakers of Tajik, a Persian language that became dominant in the region. They also eventually converted to Islam, which brought with it pressure to adopt Arabic and Persian. Yet somehow, in their isolated valley, they managed to keep their ancient tongue alive. The Yaghnobi language offers an incredible window into the past. Linguists have found that it preserves words and grammatical features that can be traced all the way back to Proto-Indo-European, the ancestor of most European and many South Asian languages. For instance, the Yaghnobi word for daughter, du-gamma-di, is almost identical to the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European form, *du-tu-ter. It's as if we had a living fossil of language, offering clues to how our distant ancestors might have spoken thousands of years ago. But language isn't the only thing the Yaghnobis have preserved. Many elements of their traditional culture also harken back to ancient times. For instance, they've maintained a number of pre-Islamic customs that likely have roots in the old Zoroastrian religion of the Sogdians. These include fire veneration rituals and certain taboos, like prohibitions against blowing out candles or shaking water off one's hands after washing. The Yaghnobis have also preserved traditional forms of music, dance, and oral storytelling that may have ancient Sogdian roots. Their folk tales often feature motifs from Persian mythology and Zoroastrian cosmology. Some scholars have even suggested that certain Yaghnobi rituals and festivals may preserve elements of the ancient Sogdian calendar. One particularly fascinating aspect of Yaghnobi culture is their traditional system of customary law, known as adat. This complex set of social norms and dispute resolution mechanisms has been passed down orally for generations. Some legal historians believe it may preserve elements of ancient Sogdian legal practices that have been lost elsewhere. The material culture of the Yaghnobis also offers intriguing links to the past. Their traditional clothing, especially women's headdresses, shows similarities to garments depicted in ancient Sogdian art. Their distinctive style of house construction, using stone and timber, has changed little over centuries and may reflect building techniques that go back to Sogdian times. Now, it's important to note that Yaghnobi culture isn't some kind of perfectly preserved time capsule from the ancient world. Like all living cultures, it has evolved and adapted over time, incorporating influences from surrounding peoples and responding to changing circumstances. But what's remarkable is how much they've managed to retain despite enormous pressures to assimilate. This preservation didn't happen by accident. It required a conscious effort by generations of Yaghnobis to maintain their unique identity. They developed strategies for cultural transmission, like elaborate oral traditions and memory techniques to preserve their language and customs. They also maintained a strong sense of group identity and endogamy, rarely marrying outside their community. The story of Yaghnobi cultural preservation raises fascinating questions about the nature of identity and tradition. How do small groups maintain their distinctiveness in the face of pressure from dominant cultures? What motivates people to preserve ancient traditions even when it might be easier to assimilate? How much can a culture change while still maintaining a sense of continuity with the past? These aren't just academic questions, they're issues that many minority cultures around the world grapple with today. The Yaghnobi experience offers valuable insights into the strategies that small groups can use to maintain their identity in a globalizing world. It also challenges us to think about what we mean by authenticity in culture. The Yaghnobis aren't living museum pieces, they're a living, evolving culture that has found ways to adapt while still maintaining connections to their ancient heritage. Their example suggests that cultural preservation isn't about freezing things in time, but about finding ways to keep traditions meaningful and relevant in changing circumstances. As we wrap up this section, I want to emphasize just how extraordinary the Yaghnobi cultural survival story really is. These people have managed to preserve elements of a civilization that elsewhere vanished over 1,000 years ago. They offer us a living link to the lost world of the Silk Road and the ancient Iranian cultures that once dominated Central Asia. Their language and traditions are invaluable resources for scholars trying to understand this crucial period of human history. But beyond their historical value, the Yaghnobis remind us of the incredible diversity of human cultures and the tenacity with which people can cling to their identity even in the harshest circumstances. Their story is a testament to the power of cultural memory and the human desire to maintain connections with our roots. In our next segment, we'll explore how this ancient culture confronted one of the greatest challenges in its long history, the upheavals of the Soviet era and their lasting impacts on Yaghnobi society. Stay tuned. Part 2. Uprooted, Soviet policies and the disruption of Yaghnobi life. Now that we've explored the ancient roots of Yaghnobi culture, let's fast forward to the 20th century and examine one of the most traumatic and transformative periods in their long history, the era of Soviet rule in Central Asia. The story of what happened to the Yaghnobis during this time is a stark illustration of how well-intentioned but misguided social engineering policies can have devastating effects on minority cultures. Our story begins in the 1920s, when the newly established Soviet government began to extend its control over the remote mountain regions of what would become Tajikistan. At first, the impact on the Yaghnobis was relatively limited. Their isolated valley was of little economic importance, and the Soviet authorities initially took a hands-off approach. But this period of benign neglect wouldn't last. By the 1930s, Stalin's regime had embarked on a massive campaign of collectivization and forced resettlement across the Soviet Union. The goal was to modernize agriculture, extract resources from remote areas, and bring minority groups under tighter state control. The Yaghnobis got their first taste of these policies in the 1930s, when Soviet authorities began pressuring them to form collective farms. This was a huge disruption to their traditional way of life, which was based on small-scale subsistence agriculture and herding. Many Yaghnobis resisted, clinging to their ancestral lands and traditional practices. But the real hammer blow came in 1970. In a shockingly sudden operation, Soviet authorities forcibly evacuated nearly the entire population of the Yagnob Valley, some 3,000 people, and resettled them hundreds of miles away in the cotton-growing regions of southwestern Tajikistan. The official justification for this drastic move was concern about natural disasters. The authorities claimed that the Yaghnobi villages were at risk from avalanches and mudslides. But many scholars believe the real motivations were more complex. The Soviet government wanted to increase cotton production, and they needed labor for the vast state farms in the lowlands. They also likely saw an opportunity to break up a stubbornly traditional community and force its members to modernize. Whatever the reasons, the impact on the Yaghnobi people was catastrophic. Imagine being suddenly uprooted from the only home you've ever known, a place your ancestors had lived for over 1,000 years, and dumped in a completely alien environment. The Yaghnobis went from their cool mountain valleys to the scorching plains of southern Tajikistan, where summer temperatures routinely exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. The culture shock was immense. Many Yaghnobis had never even seen a car before, let alone modern farm machinery. They were expected to immediately adapt to a completely different way of life, working on huge mechanized cotton farms instead of tending their small plots and herds in the mountains. The health impacts were severe. Many Yaghnobis, especially children and the elderly, fell ill from the heat and unfamiliar diseases. They were poorly housed, often in hastily constructed shacks with no running water or electricity. Forced to work long hours in the cotton fields, many suffered from exhaustion and malnutrition. But perhaps the greatest trauma was cultural. In their isolated valley, the Yaghnobis had maintained their unique language and traditions for over a millennium. Now they were scattered across several settlements, mixed in with other ethnic groups. Children were sent to Russian or Tajik language schools, where their native tongue was forbidden. Traditional customs and religious practices were discouraged or outright banned. The human cost of this forced relocation was staggering. By some estimates, hundreds of Yaghnobis died in the first few years after resettlement due to disease, malnutrition, and the sheer stress of displacement. Many others suffered from depression and other mental health issues as they struggled to cope with the loss of their homeland and way of life. But here's where the story takes an inspiring turn. Despite the enormous pressures they faced, many Yaghnobis refused to give up their identity. In secret, families continued to speak their language and practice their traditions. They formed tight-knit communities within the larger settlements, trying to recreate some semblance of their old way of life. Some Yaghnobis even risked severe punishment by attempting to return to their ancestral valley. There are incredible stories of people making arduous journeys back to the mountains, often on foot, braving harsh weather and the threat of arrest to reclaim their homeland. By the late 1970s, Soviet authorities had relaxed some of the strictest controls, and a trickle of Yaghnobis began to permanently return to the Yagnob Valley. They found their old villages in ruins, deliberately destroyed by the authorities to discourage return. But with incredible determination, they began to rebuild. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 and Tajikistan's independence opened up new possibilities for the Yaghnobis. The new government officially allowed them to return to their ancestral lands. But by this point, an entire generation had grown up in exile, and many had put down roots in their new homes. Only a fraction of the community chose to return to the mountains. Today, the Yaghnobi people remain divided. A small population of perhaps 500 people lives in the Yagnob Valley, striving to maintain traditional ways of life. A much larger group, numbering several thousand, remains in the lowland areas where they were resettled. Many others have moved to cities like Dushanbe, the capital of Tajikistan. This diaspora situation has created new challenges for preserving Yaghnobi culture. Those who return to the valley have struggled to rebuild their communities with limited resources. They face harsh economic realities and the lure of modern conveniences that draw young people to the cities. Meanwhile, Yaghnobis in urban areas and the cotton-growing regions face pressure to assimilate into the broader Tajik culture. The linguistic situation is particularly precarious. While the Yaghnobi language has shown remarkable resilience, it's now classified as endangered by UNESCO. Most young Yaghnobis are more comfortable in Tajik or Russian. There are ongoing efforts by scholars and community members to document the language and create educational materials, but it's an uphill battle. The Soviet-era resettlement has had other lasting impacts on Yaghnobi society. Traditional social structures and leadership roles were disrupted. Many aspects of material culture, like traditional crafts and building techniques, have been lost or altered. The community's relationship with the land and traditional ecological knowledge have been profoundly changed. But it's not all doom and gloom. The Yaghnobi experience also demonstrates the incredible resilience of culture and identity. Despite all they've endured, the Yaghnobis have managed to maintain a strong sense of who they are and where they came from. There's a growing movement, especially among younger Yaghnobis, to reconnect with their heritage and revitalize their language and traditions. This cultural revitalization effort faces many challenges. How do you rebuild a traditional way of life after such massive disruption? How do you make ancient customs relevant to a generation raised in a very different world? These are questions the Yaghnobi community is actively grappling with today. The story of the Yaghnobi resettlement raises profound questions about the ethics of development and the rights of minority cultures. While the Soviet authorities may have believed they were helping to modernize a backward people, their top-down approach caused immense suffering and nearly destroyed a unique culture. It's a stark reminder of the dangers of imposing progress without considering the wishes and values of the people affected. At the same time, the Yaghnobi experience forces us to grapple with difficult questions about tradition and change. Is it realistic or even desirable to try to preserve a traditional way of life unchanged in the modern world? How do minority cultures balance maintaining their uniqueness with participating in broader society? These are issues that many indigenous and minority groups around the world are wrestling with. The Yaghnobi story also illuminates the long-term consequences of forced displacement, an issue that remains tragically relevant today with millions of refugees and internally displaced people worldwide. The trauma of displacement can echo through generations, affecting everything from mental health to cultural transmission. As we conclude this section, I want to emphasize that the Soviet-era disruptions, while enormously significant, are just one chapter in the long history of the Yaghnobi people. Their culture has proved remarkably adaptable over the centuries, incorporating influences from various conquerors and neighbors while maintaining its core identity. The challenges they face today are in many ways a continuation of this long process of adaptation and resilience. In our next segment, we'll look at how the Yaghnobis are working to revitalize their culture in the post-Soviet era, and what their experience can teach us about cultural preservation in a rapidly changing world. Stay with us. Part 3. Revival and Adaptation, Yaghnobi Culture in the 21st Century. In our final segment, let's explore how the Yaghnobi people are navigating the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. Their story offers fascinating insights into how minority cultures can adapt and thrive in a globalized world while still maintaining their unique identity. The collapse of the Soviet Union and Tajikistan's independence in 1991 opened up new possibilities for the Yaghnobis. For the first time in decades, they had the freedom to openly practice their traditions and reconnect with their heritage. But they also faced daunting challenges. Years of forced resettlement and assimilation policies had taken their toll. Many young Yaghnobis had grown up speaking Tajik or Russian rather than their ancestral language. Traditional knowledge and customs had been disrupted or lost. Despite these obstacles, the past 3 decades have seen a remarkable cultural revival among the Yaghnobi people. This renaissance has taken different forms in different parts of the community. In the Yaghnob Valley itself, a small but determined group of families has returned to rebuild their ancestral villages. Life in the valley remains incredibly harsh. The winters are long and bitter, and there's little in the way of modern infrastructure. But for these Yaghnobis, the chance to reconnect with their homeland and live according to traditional ways is worth the hardship. One of the most inspiring aspects of this return movement is how it's blending old and new. Yes, many families are embracing traditional farming and herding practices. But they're also selectively adopting modern technologies where useful. Solar panels now power lights and satellite phones in some villages. Some farmers are experimenting with new crops and techniques to improve food security in the harsh mountain environment. This pragmatic approach extends to other aspects of life as well. While the Valley Yaghnobis are working hard to preserve their language and customs, they're not trying to live in a time capsule. Many families send their children to school in lowland cities for part of the year, recognizing the need for education to thrive in the modern world. The challenge is finding ways to give young people opportunities while still maintaining their connection to Yaghnobi culture. Meanwhile, in the lowland areas where many Yaghnobis still live, cultural revival has taken different forms. Unable to fully recreate traditional lifestyles, these communities have focused on preserving language, music, crafts, and oral traditions. Yaghnobi cultural associations have sprung up in several cities, organizing language classes, cultural festivals, and other activities to keep traditions alive. One particularly exciting development has been the emergence of Yaghnobi music and dance groups. These ensembles are breathing new life into traditional art forms, sometimes fusing them with contemporary styles to create something uniquely Yaghnobi yet modern. Their performances at cultural festivals have helped raise awareness of Yaghnobi culture both within Tajikistan and internationally. The Yaghnobi diaspora in major cities like Dushanbe has played a crucial role in this cultural renaissance. Many urban Yaghnobis have used their education and access to resources to become advocates for their community. They've worked to document the Yaghnobi language, record oral histories, and lobby for greater recognition of Yaghnobi rights and cultural heritage. Technology has become a powerful tool in these preservation efforts. Social media and messaging apps have allowed scattered Yaghnobi communities to stay connected, sharing news, cultural knowledge, and language resources. Young Yaghnobis are creating YouTube channels and TikTok accounts to showcase their culture to a global audience. There's even a small but growing body of Yaghnobi language content online, from traditional stories to modern pop songs. One of the most crucial battlegrounds in the fight to preserve Yaghnobi culture is language. The Yaghnobi language, after centuries of resilience, is now classified as endangered. Most young Yaghnobis are more comfortable in Tajik or Russian, but there are encouraging signs of a linguistic revival. In recent years, Yaghnobi language classes have been introduced in some schools in areas with significant Yaghnobi populations. A team of linguists and community members has developed the first comprehensive Yaghnobi Tajik English dictionary, an invaluable resource for language learners and scholars alike. There are also efforts underway to create children's books and other learning materials in Yaghnobi. What's particularly interesting about these language revitalization efforts is how they're adapting the language for the modern world. New words are being coined for contemporary concepts, often drawing on Yaghnobi's ancient Iranian roots rather than simply borrowing from Tajik or Russian. It's a delicate balance between preserving the language's unique character and ensuring it remains a living, useful tongue for new generations. Another fascinating aspect of the Yaghnobi cultural revival is how it's reshaping their relationship with their Sogdian heritage. For centuries, the Yaghnobis preserved a memory of their Sogdian ancestors, but it was often vague and mixed with legend. Now, armed with new historical and archaeological knowledge, many Yaghnobis are actively exploring and reclaiming this ancient legacy. This has led to some interesting developments. Some Yaghnobi artists and craftspeople are drawing inspiration from ancient Sogdian designs found in archaeological sites like Ponjikent. There's been a revival of interest in traditional Yaghnobi names, many of which have Sogdian roots. Some Yaghnobis are even studying the fragmentary remains of the Sogdian language to better understand the origins of their own tongue. This engagement with Sogdian heritage has also given the Yaghnobi community a new sense of importance on the world stage. As the last living link to this influential ancient civilization, they've attracted interest from scholars, tourists, and cultural enthusiasts from around the globe. While this attention brings its own challenges, it's also instilled a sense of pride and purpose in many Yaghnobis, especially young people who might otherwise have been tempted to abandon their heritage. The Yaghnobi revival hasn't been without controversy, however. Like many minority groups going through cultural revitalization, the community is grappling with questions of authenticity and tradition. What aspects of the old ways should be preserved, and what can be changed? Who gets to decide what is authentically Yaghnobi? These debates can sometimes become heated, reflecting deeper tensions between different segments of the community. There's also the complex issue of Yaghnobi identity in modern Tajikistan. While there's growing recognition of the Yaghnobis' unique heritage, they're still officially considered part of the Tajik ethnic group. Some Yaghnobi activists have pushed for status as a distinct ethnic minority, arguing it would give them greater cultural and linguistic rights. Others worry this could lead to further marginalization or conflict with the Tajik majority. The Yaghnobi community also faces significant economic challenges. The Yaghnob Valley remains one of the poorest and most isolated regions of Tajikistan. Many young Yaghnobis, both in the valley and in lowland areas, are tempted to seek better opportunities in cities or abroad. This brain drain poses a serious threat to cultural continuity. Some innovative solutions are emerging to address these economic issues. There's growing interest in developing sustainable tourism in the Yaghnob Valley, allowing visitors to experience traditional Yaghnobi culture while bringing in much-needed income. Some entrepreneurs are finding ways to market traditional Yaghnobi crafts and agricultural products to niche markets. And there are efforts to develop small-scale industries that can provide jobs while respecting traditional ways of life. As we wrap up our exploration of Yaghnobi culture, it's worth reflecting on the broader implications of their story. The Yaghnobi experience offers valuable lessons for other minority cultures facing similar challenges around the world. First, it demonstrates the incredible resilience of cultural identity. Despite centuries of pressure and decades of active suppression, the Yaghnobis have managed to maintain a strong sense of who they are. This speaks to the deep human need for cultural belonging and the power of collective memory. Second, the Yaghnobi revival shows that cultural preservation doesn't have to mean freezing a way of life in amber. The most successful efforts have found ways to adapt traditions for the modern world, making them relevant and meaningful for new generations. Third, the Yaghnobi story highlights the crucial role of language in cultural identity. Even as other aspects of traditional life have changed, the Yaghnobi language has remained a core marker of identity and a repository of cultural knowledge. This underscores the importance of mother tongue education and language revitalization efforts for minority communities worldwide. Fourth, the Yaghnobi experience illustrates both the benefits and challenges of globalization for minority cultures. While global connections have brought new pressures to assimilate, they've also provided tools and platforms for cultural preservation and revitalization that were unimaginable a generation ago. Finally, the Yaghnobi story is a powerful reminder of the value of cultural diversity. This tiny community, living in one of the most remote corners of Central Asia, has preserved linguistic and cultural knowledge that offers unique insights into human history. Their experience enriches our understanding of the incredible tapestry of human cultures and the many ways people have adapted to live in challenging environments. As we look to the future, the fate of Yaghnobi culture remains uncertain. Will they be able to maintain their unique identity in an increasingly interconnected world? Can they find a balance between preserving traditions and embracing new opportunities? Only time will tell, but one thing is clear: the Yaghnobi people have already beaten incredible odds to keep their culture alive this long. Their resilience and adaptability suggest that, one way or another, the heirs of ancient Sogdiana will continue to make their mark on the world for generations to come. As we come to the end of our journey through the fascinating world of Yaghnobi culture, let's take a moment to reflect on some of the key insights we've gained and consider their broader implications for our understanding of culture, identity, and the human experience. First and foremost, the Yaghnobi story is a powerful testament to the resilience of human cultures. Despite centuries of pressure from dominant neighbors, decades of Soviet suppression, and the relentless forces of modernization, this tiny community has managed to preserve core elements of their unique identity. This speaks to a fundamental human need for cultural belonging and the incredible strength of collective memory and tradition. At the same time, the Yaghnobi experience shows us that cultural preservation isn't about rigidly clinging to the past. The most successful efforts to keep Yaghnobi culture alive have found ways to adapt traditions for the modern world, making them relevant and meaningful for new generations. This reminds us that all cultures are dynamic, constantly evolving in response to changing circumstances while maintaining a sense of continuity with the past. The central role of language in Yaghnobi identity underscores the crucial importance of linguistic diversity. The Yaghnobi language isn't just a means of communication, it's a repository of unique knowledge, worldviews, and ways of relating to the environment that have been honed over millennia. The struggle to keep this language alive in the face of globalization reflects a global challenge. How do we preserve the richness of human linguistic diversity in a world increasingly dominated by a handful of major languages? The Yaghnobi story also offers fascinating insights into the long-term impacts of forced displacement and social engineering policies. The trauma of the Soviet-era resettlements continues to reverberate through Yaghnobi society decades later. This serves as a stark warning about the unintended consequences of top-down development schemes that fail to consider the cultural values and wishes of affected communities. On a more positive note, the recent Yaghnobi cultural revival demonstrates the power of cultural heritage as a source of strength and renewal. By reconnecting with their Sogdian roots and revitalizing traditional practices, many Yaghnobis have found new purpose and pride in their identity. This suggests that for many minority groups, the path to a vibrant future may lie in creatively re-engaging with their past. The Yaghnobi experience also highlights both the challenges and opportunities that globalization presents for minority cultures. While global forces have intensified pressures to assimilate, they've also provided new tools and platforms for cultural preservation and revitalization. The innovative ways Yaghnobis are using technology to maintain their language and traditions offer inspiring examples for other minority groups around the world. Perhaps most importantly, the Yaghnobi story reminds us of the immense value of cultural diversity. This small community, living in one of the most remote corners of Central Asia, has preserved knowledge and perspectives that offer unique insights into human history and alternative ways of relating to the world around us. Their experience enriches our understanding of the incredible tapestry of human cultures and the many ways people have adapted to live in challenging environments. As we face global challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, and social inequality, the diverse knowledge systems preserved by groups like the Yaghnobis may offer valuable insights and alternative approaches. The world's minority cultures aren't just relics of the past, they're living laboratories of human adaptation and resilience that may hold keys to our collective future. So what can we all take away from this exploration of Yaghnobi culture? I hope it's inspired you to think more deeply about your own cultural heritage and identity. What traditions and knowledge have been passed down in your family or community? How have they changed over time, and what core elements have remained constant? I also hope it's kindled your curiosity about the incredible diversity of human cultures that exist in every corner of the globe. Each of these cultures, no matter how small, has a unique story to tell and wisdom to share. By learning about them, we enrich our own understanding of what it means to be human. Finally, I hope the Yaghnobi story has highlighted the importance of supporting minority cultures and indigenous peoples in their efforts to maintain their identities and traditional knowledge. In our rapidly changing world, these diverse perspectives and ways of life are more valuable than ever. Thank you for joining me on this journey to the heart of Central Asia and the world of the Yaghnobi people. If you've enjoyed this exploration, please like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating cultures from around the world. And don't forget to share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspectives on the themes we've discussed today. Until next time, keep exploring the incredible diversity of human cultures that make our world such a rich and fascinating place.